Hello and welcome to the podcast is under review. We are your hosts, Liam Green,
And Ryan Pulsiver.
and as much as we like to, have this sort of big grand opening to the show, that's not exactly what today is about. Over the past week or so, as you likely have seen the news, um, two two hockey players were lost, and yeah, two hockey players were lost to a very unfortunate incident, and they were Matthew Gaudreau and Johnny Gaudreau, or Johnny Hockey. Um, they were in New Jersey for a family event, and unfortunately,
Sure.
they were killed in a an accident. Uh, yeah, so not exactly the news that we'd like to start off with, but things happen, and it's sort of beyond everyone's control.
Yeah, these are the hard ones to talk about. I mean, I think at this point, I can say pretty confidently, especially, we are recording this a bit after the fact. A little bit about of that was intentional, some of it was circumstantial on our end. But there's been a few days now for the information to sort of come out. The story's pretty well known. It blew up beyond even like hockey circles.
Mm-hmm.
Like this did become a story that just hit mainstream news. Different people were talking about it, athletes from different sports. Into LeBron James put out a statement pretty early into it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I thought about a lot how I wanted to talk about this and tried to figure out what the approach was because there's no point going over the events. The events are known. The the aftermath is certainly worth talking about to an extent. I mean, there are over $500,000 in the fundraiser to help out Matthew Gaudreau's widow, her name Madeline, because she's pregnant with the couple's first child. And NHL players all over poured in and helped put funds into it. Things like that are, they are important takeaways. I don't know exactly how to describe it. It is, I guess, the community lifting them up, and that is worth describing. But I think the best way to describe and talk about all of this is to sort of talk about the legacy.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the stories that have come out. I've heard a lot of stories about Matthew, especially. I mean, Johnny, we've heard kind of a lot of them, so a lot of them have sort of been a resurfacing story. But the clips we've seen of both players, the stories that have come out, and just sort of remembering who they were as individuals and the presence that they were. I mean, the impact that they had. Cole Caulfield, as we were sort of talking about before the show, is changing his number into 13 to honor Johnny Gaudreau because, and this is a little bit of a holy crap, we're old moment, but that's who he grew up watching.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of guys, especially shorter players, grew up watching Johnny Gaudreau because he is to this generation what Marty St. Louis was to him. And a lot of players, you can see the impact it's had both on, veterans and young players and people who aren't even in the league alike. And it's also on a hockey side of things, the loss of a player who I think, regardless of anything else, was on a path to make the Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
You look at the legacy, you look at the things that he's managed to accomplish over the course of his career. He's got a Hobie Baker. He's got the NHL All Rookie team. He got a Lady Bing. He's made four All Star games. Guy was going to cruise over 1,000 points. It was a Hall of Fame career, and especially for the tenacity that he had. He wasn't supposed to make it. Guys that short weren't supposed to make it. Even then, like we're still kind of at the point where that's a conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Even though we see guys like Johnny Gaudreau go out every single night and play just incredible hockey. It's still sort of fading away, but guys like him are absolutely pieces that are leading to change that. And I think that part of it obviously is very far in the back seat. Obviously, we are more concerned with who they were as people, as fathers, as husbands, as sons. But I do think that point of it as well is worth acknowledging. I mean, these are two young men who were exceptional at their sport. And Matthew played in the AHL. That's a high level. But again, and I do kind of keep coming back to this point because I will always stand by it's the most important point, is it's not about the hockey side of things. It's about the individuals that they were.
Yeah.
And that is the toughest part about this whole loss.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, no amount of words from probably anyone can, like, fully define what kind of people both Matthew and Johnny were or could have ever been. As you mentioned, already a stellar career. Even at his age right now, he's still 5th in all-time points on the Calgary Flames. Again, on track to have a great career in Columbus. He only signed there 2 years ago and had an 8-year deal. And he went to Columbus when no one else would. As of recording it today, there was sort of a press conference of Blue Jackets players. And I have a quote here by Zach Werenski, and he said, "Thank you for choosing Columbus when no one else would." And for a teammate, and for as a team like Columbus as well. Last episode we were sort of saying, they don't have a great deal of success. It's really no secret, but that doesn't define a team totally. It's the players who define the team completely, and I think just a wonderful thing for Zach Rowensky, who also donated to Matthew's wife's GoFundMe, which again has raised over 5,000 or 500,000 rather. Even as of today, and quite likely by the time this is out, it's probably more. Hockey players and people alike donating $1,300 each to it. Johnny Gaudreau were number 13. It's really the community coming together, and as you mentioned, even a broader community than just the hockey world. As you mentioned, Hall of Fame career, and it was cut way too short, and it's just not what should have happened, but we can't control that, and that's unfortunate.
The Columbus part of it, I think, is important too, because I most people have very little appetite to have the hockey part of the conversation. Obviously, duh. But it meant something when he picked there. It meant a lot, actually, when he picked there, because you have to remember, this is a franchise whose defining trait has been people will not pick them. They had their sweep against Tampa Bay, and they had all these marquee free agents. A lot of them traded on acquisitions, but even Bobrovsky, all of them go. They lose Panarin, Duchesne goes, Bobrovsky goes, all these players go. And it was just that idea of one person, pick one person, have someone choose Columbus, and Gaudreau comes out, he does, for less money than he was offered. And it's kind of something he's able to go now. It's sort of a family decision for him, and he comes in to turn the franchise around. 74 points in his first season, 60 in a second. Those are good numbers. Both times led the team. But it was the idea that he picked Columbus in a time where not enough people did for that team. And that was big. It's hard to understate that part of it for Columbus fans. And of course, Columbus fans, this also isn't their first loss in the last couple of years. Of course, Matisse was taken from them very significantly, way too young just a few years ago. So even that, like to recover even from that is one thing, and it comes back and it strikes them again. I make a lot of jokes. I like to make fun of teams. Columbus tends to get it because we've played in the playoffs. There is not a fan base that I think I have more sympathy for in terms of the things that have happened to this team, the challenges, the heartaches that they've faced. It is an unfathomable amount of tragedy. One of these incidences is an unfathomable amount of tragedy.
Hmm.
They've had two.
Yeah.
And there's nothing I would like to see more than for this team to come together and play for both of them, but on a much more important basis to make sure that as a team you are taking care of these guys, because this is an unfathomable loss. I can't think of a better description. I can't think of better wording than unfathomable. And a guy who was the face of your franchise, and again was a great guy from every account we've seen. There was never, and this is beforehand because you're not going to hear it now. There was never a bad story that came out about Johnny Gaudreau. A guy who would take the time, a guy who would spend his day to make someone else, a young fan, happy. A guy who was always smiling, always laughing in the dressing room. Who had fun on the ice every single time he stepped onto it, and the same is true for Matthew. Because we cannot lose sight of him in this conversation just because he didn't put on an NHL jersey. The level of loss, again, to use the word unfathomable again, and I can't wait for the number to be retired because it's coming, both for Columbus and Calgary. It should never be worn again on either team. And, it is a shame that that he picked Columbus to help, bring that franchise out, and he doesn't get the opportunity to see that through.
Yeah, and the other side to that is, well, he also played in for Calgary he was drafted by Calgary, 104th overall. Again, as you mentioned, never supposed to make it. He was short, and people were like, well, that doesn't work in the NHL. And, again, I go back to the potential Hall of Fame career, and like looking at his point values, before he left for Columbus, he had 115 points in 82 games played. By far leading a Calgary Flames team, which is sort of in that state of not rebuild, because they don't like the term rebuild, but you're still putting up ridiculous numbers, still leading the team, still leading the charge for a Flames team that's maybe a bit more depleted than it was in past years. Um, I agree. I think number 13 shouldn't be worn by another Flames player or by another Blue Jackets player. Because if they want to do it just for the Flames, sure. And the Blue Jackets maybe want to keep it in rotation. I don't see a world where that does happen. I think it absolutely should be retired for both teams. But we don't truly know until it happens. We know that their first game together, I believe, in Nationwide Arena, in Columbus's arena, is December 3rd, to the best of my knowledge. But the first time they meet, I believe, is in sometime in late November. Perhaps they meet at the Saddle Dome. But even speaking of those, the photos over the past few days have been incredible, of people leaving purple Gatorade, signs, jerseys, hockey sticks all over every entrance of Saddle Dome, of Nationwide Arena. And, it just truly goes to show that in this community, how no matter how much shit we give other teams, we can sort of truly come together as one, as a whole, to mourn the loss of a truly great player, and Matthew as well.
There are a couple individual players I think are worth touching on in terms of sort of the aftermath. Sean Monahan being the first.
Yeah.
What was sort of lost in the initial flurry was the fact that, of course, they played almost a decade together in Calgary, as we sort of touched on there for a moment. He signed in Columbus this season. to a long-term contract. And I mean, he highlighted it that a huge reason of why he wanted to go there was to be with Johnny again. The opportunity to, step onto the ice with him again, but also be a part of his life, help raise his kids. That was something that was big for him in his decision. And, they were ready to kind of move into that stage, and, they were family, right? Like, they were family and ready to be together again, and that was taken from him. But this one, I don't think got around as much outside of Penguins Twitter. But Kevin Hayes. Kevin Hayes was one of Gaudreau's best friends. They played together in Boston College for 3 years. Of course, Kevin also lost his brother Jimmy a few years ago. So it's been a very rough few years. He put out a very sentimental post about Johnny that is worth taking the time to go read. I mean, there's so many posts that are worth reading. So many guys with so many great things to say about him. People like Kevin who got to play with him, but even those who didn't. I think his is especially worth reading. But I've seen a lot of calls on Penguin social media to make sure this guy gets treated right with us this season. Of course, we brought him in with a second round pick for some future considerations. And, again, a guy who has been through tragedy before. All you can do is wish well for everyone involved. That's kind of all there is to say.
Also mentioning in that, we already mentioned him, Cole Caulfield. Of course, changing his jersey number from 22 to now 13 in honor of Johnny Gaudreau. Again, a shorter player in the, typically taller, dominated player base. In his post, not only did he grow up idolizing Gaudreau, he got a chance to play with him for, I believe it was Worlds. But he got a chance to play with his idol. Again, looking up to him, it's always, I can't imagine how thrilling it must be to be playing on the same team as your idol. Meeting the guy in person, talking with the guy in person, and again, playing on the ice with the person. Yeah, Cole Caulfield as well should be mentioned in that.
I don't think we're going to spend too much more time on this.
Yeah.
But a couple things that I wanted to highlight. There's two of them that if you're looking at a little bit more happier of a note, for lack of a better description. In 2016, Gaudreau put out an article in the Players Tribune titled "Here's Johnny," which is an objectively very funny name. He talks about sort of his background and him growing up and the lessons that he learned to help him get to the NHL. Because, we can't state enough how scrutinized young players have been, or short players have been. It's, it is just not a thing. It's why to describe him as, this generation's Martin St. Louis is because there's not that many guys who did it and had that level of success. So he's kind of talking about all that. He talks about, like, it's, 2016. So at this point, he's been in the NHL. He's been to the All-Star game already. So he talks about things like that. It's a great read. We're going to have it here in the bio or the description of this video if you want to check it out. I also recommend JFresh Hockey on Twitter has a thread that he posted, basically asking for any Johnny Gaudreau stories or favorite moments. And there are tons of replies. And they are completely worth checking in. There's some great moments. Personal favorite of mine is him getting scared by the Columbus Cannon when he was still in Calgary.
That's an all-time classic.
If for nothing else, the irony of him going there after the fact.
Yeah.
But I love he jumps and then you can see him just curse to himself because you knew he was sitting there going, "I'm not gonna do it.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna do it." He still does it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So Jay Fresh's tweet is something I recommend looking up. It's got a ton of great moments from a ton of different people, all sorts of different clips, some of which I had never seen before. A lot of them I kind of went, "Oh yeah, I forgot about that," but definitely a good chunk of them were completely new to me. So if you're looking to see a little bit more about him or remember him, I think that's a really good way to do it as well.
So not a great deal of uh, news happening, at least right now in the NHL. Again, the Gaudreau thing aside, one thing we did mention in our last podcast was that there were two offer sheets given out by the St. Louis Blues to Edmonton Oilers, or former, I should say now, Edmonton Oilers players Philip Broberg and Dylan Holloway. And, well, that week's schedule has passed, and they are now St. Louis Blues.
I thought one would be saved. I will say, I really thought one of them would be brought back. Ultimately, that doesn't end up being the case. I think, for what it's worth, the Oilers didn't play this too poorly.
Mm-hmm.
A worthwhile thing to remember, or maybe note if you didn't hear about this, is the day that they completed the offer sheet, they made a trade with the Oilers.
Mm-hmm.
Blues sent over a 2028 third and Paul Fisher, who was a prospect for the team, in exchange for a cool, crisp high five, I'm pretty sure,
Mm-hmm.
and them not blowing up the Blues' plans.
Yeah.
And, I guess it gets to a point where, as an organization, they kind of looked at it and went, you know what? We have the cap to match because they traded off Cody Ceci to the Sharks, only had to give up like a third to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Seriously, Sharks, what is wrong with you? Why would you let them off that easy?
I will say as well, the return for Cody Ceci was also Ty Emberson.
Oh, yes, they also got a
Uh,
depth defender back. That's
yeah,
true.
which is sort of their response. They got a much younger defender in Emberson. I'm not quite sure of his stats off the top of my head. I have to look them up, but he seemed like a pretty fair, like a pretty solid depth piece even for a Sharks team that was less than great. Okay, so in 30 games played, he had 10 points.
Yeah, he might play. He might not.
Yeah, it's sort of a bit of a crapshoot right now. But again, as I mentioned, they have that younger factor. He's only 24 years old. And they got that. And as well, to sort of ease the pain, I'll say, for the Holloway thing, which, by all accounts, everyone thought was more possible than Broberg. But alas, Holloway is now blue, and Edmonton traded to get Podkolzin from Vancouver, who I do think he also played as well.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, he played for the Canucks, but he sort of bounced between Abbotsford and then Vancouver. And for Vancouver, he played 19 games this past season, recording only 2 points, no goals, just 2 assists.
Yeah,
again, another depth
he struggled.
entry. Yeah,
He struggled to make the jump, but I think with the talent that he has, I don't hate just throwing him in the top 6 and going, all right, man, time to do it. You're a top 10 pick pre-pandemic.
mm-hmm.
Let's go. And if he doesn't work, you paid a fourth.
Yeah.
Oh, well. But, yeah, he never really found a spot in Vancouver. And, in fairness, and this is, again, one of those funny statements about Vancouver, because we tend to not associate it with being true, pretty depth-filled, talent-filled lineup. So, yeah, it's not entirely surprising.
Mm-hmm.
But he'll get a chance to go to a team that is very, very big fans of offense. Something that I think will work out pretty well for them, all things considered. And I feel like he has a real chance to go in there and, put in 35 points if he gets the right opportunities. I don't think he's a star at this stage of his career, or at least I don't think you can bet on that. But certainly, I think the guy's an NHL player, and you give yourself another option, because now you might go, Savoie's not ready. All right, cool. Here's the guy you put in the meantime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, it's not like they're hurting. They didn't give up. They gave up a 4th-round pick for Podkolzin. He signed for 2 years at $1 million per. Puckpedia at least is listing them. Of course, these are just projections ahead of time, but this is listing him as on the 4th line right winger, with Evander Kane being the backup. And sort of another added thing, which we mentioned last time, was Evander Kane is still sort of uncertain whether or not he'll start with the Oilers. He's still, as far as we're aware, having some medical issues. Whether it requires surgery or not, we don't know. But that sort of helped maybe ease the pain of letting go of Broberg, again, a depth defenseman, and Holloway, a depth forward, both capable of playing NHL games and have, playoff performers as well, at least in this most recent run. But yeah, certainly getting Ty Emberson and Podkolzin helps ease the pain a little bit. And also, I should mention, Emerson listed as a second pairing right D as of right now. Again, just projections ahead of time. But what I'm seeing is that he's second pairing right D with Darnell Nurse.
Okay, that's... You could do that,
You could
I
do that.
guess.
Yeah, you could certainly do that.
Maybe don't,
Yeah.
but I guess you could do it. I mean, the important thing is, too, with this deal, and you have to remember, the 2 years matters. Specifically on Broberg more than both, but between the two of them, you're going to be putting up about $7 million. All right, sure. So we're gonna sort of reference another topic. We don't have to get into it yet, but I want to reference it just to contextualize why this move works so well for the Blues. So let's say it's $7 million, and we're going to add that on now. So all of a sudden, next year, not this year, next year's projected cap hit is $77.3 million for the Oilers. Add $7 million. Now you're at $84 million for the Edmonton Oilers. That's your projected cap hit for next year. And now you take Draisaitl's cap hit from 8.5 up to 14. You're over the salary cap. And that's where this problem gets real big, because for this year it's fine. Sure, you can do that. It's okay. All of a sudden, the Draisaitl contract, which we'll get to, we're not quite there yet, it's unaffordable. You cannot pay him that unless you go out and you have to make another move. That was the beauty of this plan. And you also have to remember, and I think we talked about this last time, you cannot trade these players. You cannot sign a player after they get matched and just go, all right, bye.
Yeah.
It's not an option. You have to hold on to them. I believe it's a year that you have to keep them for. So you can move them by the time Draisaitl's a free agent, and you can technically go over the salary cap in the offseason for a bit. So there is still a little bit of leeway for that deal to get done and not be an issue. But all of a sudden, you're now looking at your roster going, either A, we have to trade them deadline or free agency day, which is an option, but not a great one. And how much more of a return are you getting for Broberg than a second? Holloway, I think you could maybe also get a second if he has an improvement of a year. But again, you have to have that improvement, and who knows where he would have played in the lineup.
Yeah.
So you're either looking at, all right, we got to trade them, or you're looking at the rest of your roster going, okay, who do we trade? And looking at the roster, there's not a lot of great options here.
No.
I mean, Henrique and Arvidsson, maybe. You did just bring them in, though. So it's still kind of the same issue, but they're older players.
Yeah. Radek Faksa is on year 5 of his contract, set to become a UFA. You can either let him walk. Faksa traded from Dallas to St. Louis in this most recent offseason.
I mean, I'm looking at Edmonton's side, though.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I was like, Fasca. But yeah, St. Louis is fine. I mean, their only real RFA next year is Jake Neighbors. And just sign the guy. Like, it's just don't give the Oilers a chance. But again, I don't think even if you let him at RFA that the Oilers really have the opportunity to do damage here. Because they don't have the pieces. You're looking at either Kane, Arvidsson, Henrique, Jan Mark, but I don't think he's going to give you enough cap hit, or Brett Kulak. Those are the guys you can move. Or, even goaltending, you can't really move Stuart Skinner. So yeah, those are your options, and no team's answering the phone to you.
Yeah.
You're paying to get rid of those guys. So would you rather have a second-round pick and lose Broberg, or keep Broberg, lose Kulak, and have to pay another second-round pick or pay a first-round pick to do so? And if you don't do that, whoops, no Leon Draisaitl. Sorry. It's a perfect play by the St. Louis Blues. And the Oilers, in clearing up CC, got the space to match. And to their credit, as to Stan Bowman's credit, unfortunately, They went, hey, give us stuff or we'll match because we have the space to do it. And the Blues had already kind of come that far and went, yeah, okay. It made more sense for them to give up a little bit more and have the deal done than lose out on one of their guys last minute. But even still, to give up a guy who was drafted in the 5th, 2/3 and a second for Broberg and Holloway is not a bad bit of business.
No, I mean, it's not exactly tidy. It was sort of, as we covered last time, offer sheets aren't typically used all that often. In fact, Doug Armstrong, Blues GM's quote of saying, I didn't know there was sort of, an unspoken agreement to not use offer sheets. I think that's maybe a little bit of class from him. But, it's a move not often seen. But the Blues took advantage, as you mentioned, of not a weakened Oilers roster, but desperate for that little bit extra cash to sign Draisaitl for now, and then next year, the big guy, Connor McDavid. And if Draisaitl went for 14, what's Connor McDavid gonna ask for, right? See, that's the thing. You have to play with your cap hit. And again, you can go off, you can go higher than the total cap in the off season. That's 2 months of play to work with, but like looking at this, you're probably going to have to make some significant moves. You're going to have a ridiculous amount of money tied up in 4 players. Where have I heard that before? It's certainly not looking like a pretty situation for the Oilers, and yeah, Blues took advantage of it, and good on them. I think, and I don't know if this is sort of a hot take, I think offer sheets should be used more frequently, honestly.
I don't think it's a hot take. I think it's a hot take only to the 32 people in charge. 31, actually, apparently.
The 31 people in charge. Yeah, I mean, you can see it as a slight, or you can see it as a interesting business move. Maybe this will be the tide turner for using offer sheets more. We don't really know. Like the last time it was used was, I believe it was 2021 with Jesperi Kotkaniemi. And then only 3 years later, offer sheets to the same team, 2 players of the same team. And I don't even remember when it was before that, before 2021.
Well, it would have been Aho just a couple years before.
Okay. So, it's sort of turning the tide. I think it's... So, yeah. So 2021 was Jesperi Kotkaniemi, Sebastian Aho was in 2019. Before that, it was 2013, Ryan O'Reilly from Colorado, and the Calgary Flames offer sheeted him for 2 years at $10 million for Ryan O'Reilly. That's, yeah.
10 million per year or 10 million total?
I believe it'd be 10 million total, though as I'm seeing this, Dylan Holloway 2 years, 4.58 million.
So yeah, that would be 2 total then.
Yeah, so probably 5 million per. That math checks out probably. So what? That's 2 years removed from Aho to Kotkaniemi, and then 3 years removed from Kotkaniemi to both Broberg and Dylan Holloway. Hey, you know what? It makes covering stuff more fun. It makes covering roster moves more fun. You have a deadline to figure it out. It adds pressure to, probably the immense pressure cooker that is an NHL offseason for GMs and for executives anyway. It's just throwing a little bit of gasoline on the fire. And I think we heat that up all day.
I will make a small correction. I'm on Puckpedia here, which is where I was looking at the Oilers cap. They've already accounted for Draisaitl's extension.
Oh, okay.
So they would still be at 84 million out of 88, roughly, if they matched both.
Mm-hmm.
So they could have matched Holloway and been fine for next year. Although they have quite a few. They'd have 4 forward UFAs as of right now, so they would have to do some replacing.
Mm-hmm.
But it still meant Broberg would be unmatchable.
Yeah. And I mean, I wonder if that was the goal, just because they put up so much for Broberg the 2 years for what was it, the 4 million some odd. Like, I figure Broberg was their target. Holloway was just more of a, oh, this guy looks like he can do some business on the ice. What if we just throw a little offer sheet to him too?
I don't think I totally agree with that, because you got to also remember contextually the way this works, and I think there are probably some people at home who aren't totally familiar with the system, is you have to give up draft picks, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
You got to give up draft picks, but they have to be your draft picks. And that's an important conversation.
Right.
So immediately when you look at the ranges, you cannot offer Broberg and Holloway in the same range.
Mm.
So if you're offering, I don't remember what the exact number is, but $2 million is worth a third round pick, and we'll say $3 million is the second. You have to offer him the $3 million because you can only have one of them. You can only make an offer to one of them because you only get the pick to one of them.
Mm.
And if you're gonna offer the second rounder anyway, well, if you really want to tie Edmonton up, bring the offer up. Might as well offer the most you can.
Mm.
So I don't necessarily know if it's one was preferred over the other, and that was the reason. I suppose the thing that I do find weird, and the case I think that you have to that statement, is Broberg is a weird one to give the money that he has, on account that he played 12 games last season.
Yeah.
But I don't necessarily know if the numbers spell either way who this team really wanted, because there had to be that difference in number anyway. It was just a question of who was going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, this has definitely freed out the way for them to start having that Draisaitl conversation, because Draisaitl also could have asked for more.
Oh yeah, he could have asked for the world, and Edmonton would have moved mountains to make it happen.
If Draisaitl makes $16 million per year, I think we all go, woo, okay.
Yeah, I mean, sure, it's a pretty penny, but I mean, I think at the value alone is what the discourse I've seen is the value alone that he's provided already. 8.5 million, coming off 8 full years of his contract. The value alone he's put into your team is crazy ridiculous. To even be your number 2 center, when you, like I mentioned, have Connor McDavid, just this monster player, as your number 1 C. Like, and as I mentioned as well, like, if Leon Draisaitl asks for the world, move mountains, and it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when Connor McDavid asks for the world, what are you going to do then? Because he's going to.
You give him the max if that's what it takes.
Yeah. Like, you literally cannot afford to lose either of them, realistically. And if you did, you're going to get laughed at. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. If you let go of Draisaitl, which maybe it was in the talks, we don't ever truly know, but realistically, no, they were never going to. And then Connor McDavid, forget about it. They're not giving him up for anything. If he wants to go where he wants to go, he can do that. He'll be a UFA. But Edmonton, he knows for a fact, and it's no secret, Edmonton is gonna, try to get him to re-sign with Edmonton, because of course they are, right?
Anything short of this team is inevitably missing the playoffs and we don't have them to an extension, you don't have the conversation.
Yeah.
That being said, you also can't, in that hypothetical situation that's not going to happen, and let's be clear about that, you also can't Shohei Ohtani yourself.
Yeah.
Because, the Angels, oh boy, what a mistake keeping Ohtani was.
Hmm.
But anything short of that, you give him whatever it takes.
Yeah.
You pay whatever the cost is. Because even if you go into the offseason, you could probably, if he goes, yeah, I'm not signing, you could probably still trade his rights for a first.
Hmm.
You get the 8th year of Connor McDavid, and that's what he wants. You're paying the first.
Hmm.
But again, I can't envision a world where Connor McDavid leaves. I know this is probably the least shocking take. He's gonna resign. He's gonna make more than 14. He should make more than 14. And I mean, like, the conversation changed when they went to the Cup Finals.
Yeah.
They are so lucky. They are so lucky that they did it this year. The conversation changed. Because if we're talking about an Oilers team that hasn't had success, if we're talking about an Oilers team that got bounced in the early second round, lost like 5 games, we're having a very different conversation about this team, and I don't necessarily know if this deal is done. And if it is, it might be a higher number. But to get that close, to get a period away from a Stanley Cup,
not even a period, a goal, 2 goals away,
you can be sold on that.
Yeah.
So I think they're a little lucky with the timing of how this lined up. Because now you can look at them and go, hey guys, look what we've done. We made it all the way to the Cup Finals. But as a team, you're now going to have to, have $5.5 million less for your supporting core. Because, I mean, this team really does get by on some very good contracts.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of a big part of how they pull this off. And that's going to be trouble on account of McDavid's probably getting a raise. Draisaitl's got a huge raise. Hyman's fine, assuming he doesn't decline. And beyond that, there's no great contracts on this team anymore.
No,
most of them
all just ballooned.
Some of them, like Matthias Janmark for $1.5 million. Solid player, solid money. It's not crazy steal that offsets McDavid and Draisaitl making $25 million, over $25 million, $26 million in 2025-26. And they're worth it. But as a team, you also got to go, how do we win with this? And as you alluded to, you get the core 4 conversations going. Darnell Nurse is another 925. So all of a sudden, it's 3 players for $35 million. And the thing is, they don't really have a 4th player that lines up with that narrative. Hyman and Nuge are like 5 each.
Yeah. I think the going story for that upcoming 4th, though, is probably Evan Bouchard, though. Or Matthias Ekholm. Like, Ekholm's going into the final year of his contract this upcoming season. He's being paid $6 now. He was a stellar ad when he came to the Oilers org. And Bouchard, he's an RFA, so maybe he'll get offer sheeted. That'll be an interesting story. But they're your top pairing defensemen. Darnell Nurse probably should have been there, but what are you gonna do? So I think either one of them could make that case to be that 4th. I think right now, I would probably just include Hyman more, just because he went on like a crazy, ridiculous run this past season. Like, ridiculous amount of points for someone we thought would probably, or maybe not we, but maybe everyone thought, oh yeah, he's just a depth ad. And then he goes on to drop 77 points in 80 games this past season. Before that, it was 79 points, or 79 games played, 83 points. So he was over a point per game there. That was in 22-23, and then 21-22, 76 games, 54 points. It's only going up. And not a lot of people expected it to. At least maybe in my opinion alone, and feel free to flame me for that. But I think Hyman's probably that 4th player in that conversation.
And I'm also talking like numbers wise, because Bouchard for Nurse for sure would be a swap. To be clear, I'm talking purely like cap hit wise.
Yeah.
Because Darnell Nurse is not any team's core 4. Sorry. Yeah. Not sorry.
But anyway, yeah, like, we've sort of seen what happens with ridiculous prices, ridiculous contracts for players. Prime example being your Toronto Maple Leafs. and sort of the reshuffling they have to do almost every season uh, to even stay competitive. And like, yes, they have made the playoffs each and every time. They still get dumped in the first round, except for once. So, but there's still that reshuffling that happens every single season. In the off season, you get left in the dust by Tampa or by Boston or by whoever, and then sorry, you got to reshuffle your roster because all our money's tied up in 4 players.
I don't know if we want to jump into a Leafs conversation, but I think the core four gets too much crap for the roster reshuffling, and management doesn't get enough.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's all well and good to blame the roster, but also you're the ones that just gave 4 years to Oliver Ekman-Larsson.
Mm-hmm.
Which is true, by the way.
Yep.
4 years.
Mm-hmm.
Oliver Ekman-Larsson. That's what they thought was a good idea.
Yeah.
So without going too deep, we'll get there. We'll have that conversation
Mm-hmm.
at some point when we do our predictions, which I'm hoping we'll get to next week as of when we record this. But we make no promises. I refuse to make promises that I can't officially guarantee. But
yeah,
we'll get to it before too long. But I think, again, it's also a question of how all these contracts age. Don't forget that they are also going to be paying for the sins of Jack Campbell for a while.
Yep.
And I do mean quite a while. But that's the reality. You paid him that money.
Yeah.
And oh boy, it sure did not work.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the risk you take.
Yeah. And I mean, it's always been the case too, right? Like you sign a contract which at the time, both parties have to agree to. Clearly the player likes it and the org likes it. And then, outside factors or, degrading play or what have you will always shift the value of whether that's a steal of a contract or that aged poorly, right? And again, some things you can't control, injuries being sort of the prime example. And degrading play, you're not, with signing Draisaitl to this contract, it doesn't guarantee for the next remaining 8 years, the max amount of term, he's gonna be, 100-point player, maybe even point per game. It never guarantees anything. You sign him for this money now because, again, you agreed to it. And so if he ages poorly, then what are you gonna do? You're stuck with him for 8 more years. And as you mentioned, that's the price you pay, quite literally, for success now as well, I think should also be added on to that.
How many points does Leon Draisaitl have to get for you to be like, yeah, he's worth 14 million? Like, what's the number there?
At base point per game, I don't think that should be shocking.
That's it?
I mean that as like the bar level, like base level. It should be higher than that. But I mean, at minimum, a point per game player. At, should be an acceptable level. Looking at his stats, 2018-19 was 105 points. 19-20 was 110. 21-22 was 110. The pandemic season, only 56 games played. Still at 84 points. Well over a point per game if it would have been a full season. 22-23, 80 games played, 128 points. And then this past season, 106 points with 81 games played. As I mentioned, at base point per game, at what I think is probably acceptable, is I'll shoot 110. I'll say 110. But again, as I mentioned, you can't guarantee that because of outside factors, right? He's 28 years old, so he's still, by all means, I would even argue, starting to reach the peak at this age. And then, 8 years, that contract's going to take him until he's what, 36? I believe that if that
Around
maths
there,
out,
yeah.
yeah, it'll take him to 36. Do you think he's going to be putting up 110 points per season near the end of that contract?
No, I mentioned that maybe, but if not, I mean the conversation is bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a
Mhm.
bad contract, but that's you pay the good years, 5 or 6 of them, however many you get,
Hmm.
to then go, yeah, there's a couple bad years. That is a sacrifice you make. But if that does happen, where he's only putting up 70 to 80 points, well, depending on what the cap hit, like what the cap is overall, might still be just a bad contract. You might just have to live with that because you know what? He did enough good things where you go, yeah, okay, contract's bad now, fine.
Mhm.
But it would still be a bad contract if that's what happens. And I
Yeah.
guess we'll finish this particular conversation. How much does Connor get?
How much?
What's Connor McDavid's number? Not what he can get, because we already established the answer is yes.
Yeah.
What will he get?
So Draisaitl's overall over the 8 years will be 112 million. Actually, do you want to answer first? I have maybe a bit of an interesting thought on it.
Okay. I think Connor McDavid's raise is going to be less than we think it could be,
Mm-hmm.
or at least less drastic. I think Connor McDavid is going to take 14 and a half. Put
Okay.
himself number one by a little bit, but I don't think he's going to get as much money as he can because he could get more than that.
Oh, by far.
We've covered. I don't think he's gonna. I think he's gonna take 14 and a half over 8 years. Everyone's gonna go, wow, way to take a discount for the team because he will have,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll go try to win more cups.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm putting down.
That's what you're putting down. Um,
Eh,
admittedly, mine seems silly now because I just did the math.
Hmm.
Uh, we've seen it before. Uh, namely, I believe Sidney Crosby being it. I figured the overall value would be 97 million. But yeah, I know it's a bit
Over how many years?
probably. See, that's the thing. I don't know because uh sometimes the way it shakes out, like Leafs fans, me included, thought Matthews was going to sign long term. He only signed a bridge deal for 4, right? And that shoots him out when he's sitting around, I believe, 30s, if not very very late 20s. Um, so he's still gonna have some good years. I wonder if McDavid will take like 5 or 6 years, not the full 8.
So what? If he takes 5 years, that would be 19 million per season, which I think that's more than you're allowed to take. So it would have to be 6, I think.
Yeah,
What spits
six. It
this
would be
out?
16 million.
I mean, he could certainly ask for it and get it.
Yeah.
The only problem is I don't think that makes sense for Connor because, 27 now, skip a year, 28 when you're having the conversation. 6 years puts him 34.
Hmm.
I think we're past the point where that deal makes sense for Connor. If he were to do that, it would have to be like a 2-year deal, which isn't impossible, I suppose, but I just don't feel like that would be where he would go with that.
Hmm.
So I would be inclined to say he probably doesn't take a short-term deal here because there's no real cash out that's going to come after the fact.
Hmm.
You take your 8 years, you go from there because you'll be old at that point, and nothing is guaranteed in the sport. So with that being said, I mean it. Like we kind of said, it's been. I'm not going to use the word quiet because quiet's the wrong word.
Hmm.
It has been a quality over quantity news story week. What has happened has been pretty big. We've kind of gone down most of it at this point. So we feel like it is a good spot to leave it off. I will end with a final message that I hope I don't have to say after all this has happened. I am going to say it anyway. Folks, please please, 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 do not drink and drive. Any other way that you got to get home. If you can call your parents, call some friends, do that. You can call an Uber, do that. Any other option. Spend the night if you're at a buddy's place. Anything you can do that doesn't have you drive home, please do that, because it can be a lot more of a consequence than just, oh no, I'm late for work because I stayed the night, or oh no, I spent $30 on an Uber. It is a bigger thing than that. There's no reason in 2024 for you to do anything like that. Please do not be stupid, because the cost can come of entire families. So with that, thank you so much. We are also going to have the link to the fundraiser for Gaudreau family down below. If you want to donate there, you can do so. There's also the article that I mentioned and JFresh's Twitter thread if you want to go have a look at those. And remember these two young men. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll be back at you soon.